Welcome to the third episode in which I want to show you how I build and detail cockpits. As always, this is not the one perfect way how to do this, it's just how I do it. I'm still working on this 1/44th scale Tornado from Revell, which is a twin-seater. Obviously this means that we have to build both the pilot's cockpit, but also the weapons officer's cockpit. Before and while building cockpits, I look up reference pictures online. Most kits provide you with decals for the instruments, but this one doesn't, which makes life a bit harder. Before gluing the parts together, take a look at the following steps in the manual. Sometimes there are mistakes or illogical steps to take. Another important thing is the painting. In this case I researched the correct cockpit colors, which differ quite a bit from what Revell's instructions tells us. Since this is a beginner's guide, let's also take a look at the building process. First up, I take my pliers and cut quite close to the part. I wouldn't cut as close as possible, because that way you might damage the part. As a next step, I take my hobby knife to remove these leftovers where I cut the part. I prefer scraping to using sandpaper, but that's up to you. Also, areas like these won't even be visible in the end, so take that into consideration before spending a lot of time on it. For easier handling and painting of sections like the cockpit, I can recommend getting some Petafix or blue tack and just fixing the part to a cork or any other object that's easy to handle. I use Revell's contactor glue, which has this nozzle which is quite useful. It's relatively thick though, so if you are just starting out, I would recommend getting Tamiya's extra thin right away. I put a small amount of the glue to the area where the ejection seats have to be placed and used tweezers to put them there. To remove tiny parts like the flight stick from the sprue, you can use masking tape so they don't fly off. Another way would be to cut them inside a plastic bag. And instead of tweezers, I use a toothpick with a bit of Petafix to hold small parts. If you use tweezers, there is a high risk that the part will fly off and you will never find it again. I speak from experience. Another tip is to glue small parts where they belong before evening out rough surfaces, like I did on this flight stick. Up next, I airbrushed the whole cockpit section with the correct color I researched before. FS36231 Dark Gull Grey. I don't know yet if I will do a separate video about painting, because I'm also not an expert on this, as you can see from all the bubbles coming out of the airbrush here. When the dark gull grey was done, I just added a few drops of water to this anthracite from Revell and brushed certain areas like the flight stick, the headrests and the upper areas of the instrument panels. As I said, there are no decals for the instruments, so I used my finest panel liner to add some switches, knobs and gauges. It's entirely up to you how detailed you want to be here. In many cases, these areas are nearly invisible once you close the canopy. Nonetheless, I looked up some photos and tried to recreate the real cockpits as best as I could. Obviously this process is easier if you're working on a larger scale model. If you want as many details as possible, you can look for some aftermarket photo-etched cockpit sets or get some sort of magnifying glass. To add a bit of variation, I also used a needle and added some white switches. Again, this is all very fiddly, especially if you try to film this process. To add this green shine of the displays, I used clear green from Tamiya that I also added with the help of a needle. I honestly don't put that much effort on all my cockpits, but for the sake of this video I wanted to show you what's possible, even in this small scale. So after painting all the instrument panels, I continued with the ejection seats that I brushed with olive green. Revell's aqua color is quite thick, so again I diluted it with a bit of water. I also tried the acrylic thinner in the past, but did not get any good results from that. The secret of brush painting is putting on several thin layers. You have to be a bit patient and let every layer dry before adding another one. Up next I wanted to add seat belts. Therefore I painted some masking tape in sand color and cut it into thin stripes. In the end these were out of scale, but they still add a lot to the cockpit in my opinion. When that was done I glued the instrument panels to the cockpit and airbrushed some other areas black, before gluing the cockpit between the fuselage halves. Furthermore, I can recommend to always put a front weight into the nose, even if it's not mentioned in the manual. You don't want to spend hours and hours on a model only to find out that it's a tail sitter. The next episode will probably be about canopy masking or the overall building process. Stay tuned and leave me some feedback if this helped you. Thanks for watching, bye!